Hey, hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Tobias, and on this channel I tend to look back on music from the 1980s. That's the main focus on this channel, but of course I'm going to talk about new music as well, music from the 1990s and so forth and so on. But the main focus on this channel is the 1980s. And it's been a while since I posted anything on this channel. It's a new year, so Happy New Year to you all. But there's a reason for it. I've been planning a new series that's going to run through all of 2024. And that series is a retrospective where we're going to look back 40 years ago, from 1984. What a great year for music, and especially pop music. This is the year where I discovered a lot of artists and bands. So let's kick things off today with a retrospective for January 1984. After that fancy intro to my retrospective, January 1984, I just want to give you a brief outline of how I structure these episodes. So I was born in Sweden, so naturally I went back to the Swedish charts of 1984, month by month. And I used that as a guiding tool for me to see exactly when certain tracks were released and so forth and so on, because I can pick an album from my collection and say, oh, hey, I remember buying this one in the summer of 1984. That doesn't mean it was actually released in the summer of 1984. It just happened to be the time and place where I saved up enough money to buy that record, or my kind parents bought that for me. Who knows? So it's a really good way to structure things for me when doing these episodes. And you know, back then the charts were a big thing for us, especially the radio charts, because to my recollection, the Swedish television didn't have a proper chart show at the time. They didn't show any music videos, not to any extent. That would change further down the line in 1984, but that's a couple of months away. So radio was where we got the newest music from, the radio charts, and we used to tape these short shows to cassettes and doing mixtapes, trying to cut out the DJ in the beginning of a song, at the end of a song, all those good things about doing mixtapes, right? And yeah, it was just a great medium for us to absorb new music and the hottest tracks, of course. And I'm going to use this for all of these episodes when I'm going to go through the Swedish charts. And I also have to state it's single charts that we are talking about here. I'm not doing the album charts. This was the single charts that was the most important thing for us. And if we could afford to buy anything, it would be the singles. And that's why I'm focusing on that. And I would say it was really fun to go back and read those charts, because there was a lot of records in there that were released that I forgot about. Perhaps it was a one-hit wonder that I haven't heard in years and years. And you're like, wow, that one was really, really good. I forgot about that one. Oh, it has to be on this list, and so forth and so on. And if I happen to have the records we're talking about in my collection, I will bring them out and we will talk about some of those. Either if it's the single itself or that track was actually included on an album I have in my collection. We're going to bring that forth as well. So that's how it's going to work. But enough babbling for me. Let's kick things off. And we're going to start with the number one spot for January 1984 in the Swedish charts. And that happened to be Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson and the single Say, Say, Say. Just look at my face, these tears ain't drying. What a brilliant track. It still holds up today. I think it's such good songwriting. And actually, it's not the first time they collaborated, because back in 1982, when Michael Jackson released his album Thriller, they also had a duet, if you could call it that, The Girl Is Mine, featuring Paul McCartney, of course. But it's two different tracks. The Girl Is Mine, produced by Quincy Jones, written by Michael Jackson. I don't think Paul had any writing credits on that one. But Say, written by Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson, produced by George Martin. So it's got that familiar McCartney sound on it. And there are vast differences between those two songs. I think Say is a standout track. And I haven't been the biggest Michael Jackson fan in the world up to this day. I don't have a single record with Michael Jackson. My sister was the big fan of Michael Jackson in our family, and she did have the Thriller album, so I remember listening to that a couple of times. And there are some good tracks. I like the title track Thriller and Billie Jean, of course, but except for that, not a super fan really. So I'm going to use this one to represent this song, Say. This is McCartney's solo album, Pipes of Peace, from 1983. I think it was released late in 1983, perhaps October, something like that. And it's a really, really good album. So you get Say on this one, and also the title track on this one, Pipes of Peace, is really good. And you also got other tracks like The Man. It's really good, and I just have to see. Oh yeah, Hey is really good, and Through Our Love is also good. I think all the songs on this one really holds up really well. Pop rock at its best, and McCartney doing his thing. It's just brilliant. Just have to say that. And another thing, I said this one was from 1983, and of course a lot from 1983 is spilling over into January 1984. That's just the case. It happens every year when it comes to charts. You don't going to have a lot of new tracks enter the charts at this point. It's going to happen first in February and going forward, of course. So you will see a lot of 1983 releases here. Just want to say that. Yeah, so that's it. We'll leave Say here and say that it still holds up today. And of course, check out this album. Really, really good. On the second spot of the list of January 1984, we find another one of my favorites. And this time we go in breakdancing in New York with the Rocksteady Crew and Hey You. This was something new to me at the time, and a lot of other people my age, I would think. I never heard any hip-hop records to my collection at this point, and certainly nothing electro-based like this. And remember seeing the video as well to this one, where we had all these b-boys and b-girls doing their breakdance moves. And it would be some really good entertainment if someone filmed me and my friends doing it. Well, trying to do some of these breakdance moves, because it was all the rage back then, and it would become even bigger during 1984. So we have a reason to come back to some breakdancing later in this year. But this one, standout single from the Rocksteady Crew. Still love it today. Still moves me both my feet, but I won't try any of those moves again. Watch your head, I'll just say that. But yeah, this one is really good. And if you can get hold of or going to streaming services, choose the 12-inch version of it. It really, really rocks. It's really good. And I have to look at my notes here in my notebook. It spent 6 weeks in the Swedish charts, actually. And this one came out as well in 1983. But it spent 6 weeks and peaked at number 2, which is this month in January 1984. They did go on to release other singles, I think, in 1984, but I can't even remember hearing them. But I looked at some of the UK charts, and they did have a follow-up single to this one, but it never went as big as Hey You. Really, really good one. And we now go to the number 3 spot, because that's another favorite of mine. It's Culture Club and Karma Chameleon. You string along, you string along. And this was a standout track for the Culture Club. I think it really propelled them to international stardom. This was the big single for them this year, if I'm not mistaken. And I actually did get the album where Karma Chameleon is featured on. It's called Call by Numbers. I do have it in my collection, but it's not here right now, so it has to be represented with that picture. And the reason for that is because a lot of my vinyl records is in storage in Sweden. So every time I go over there, I'll pick up some of them and bring them back. So I do that until I emptied that storage. See if I can pick it up later this year, but as for now, this has to represent it. And just to say something about that album, it's a really good one. I think it's a standout album when it comes to Culture Club's discography. Especially the track It's a Miracle, which became one of my favorites from that one. But speaking about Karma Chameleon, like I said, it was a big track for them, and it spent a whole 9 weeks in the Swedish charts and peaking at #1. And that peak already happened, I think, in 1983. It was now down to the #3 spot. Yeah. And #4 in the charts of this January of 1984, we find two legends, Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers, doing Islands in the Stream. And we rely on each other. And this is a bit of an outlier, I would say, and you will find that looking through the charts, especially in the early to mid 80s. We have these songs that you wouldn't think would appeal to the younger generation. It was more like our parents' generation. And Islands in the Stream is one of those. Beautiful, I would say somewhat of a traditional ballad, in lack of better words. But we loved it, and so did our parents. And usually when our parents liked anything back then, we were like suspicious. This is probably not any good. That's just the way we thought back then, at least me. And but this one really appealed to me and my friends, I remember that. And this is just my theory, because being in the charts, it's based on how many units you sold throughout the weeks. And this one spent 8 weeks in the chart, peaking at #3. It was a huge song. It was released in 1983, like many of the others I'm going to mention here and have mentioned. But yeah, it was big. And my theory is that our parent generation was still buying a lot of records. So that's why it actually climbed on the charts and things like this. Because it's usually nothing that is aimed for the younger generation. But we soaked it up. We did. But it would be really interesting to hear with someone who was a bit older than us at this point, if they thought the world of this as well, or it was just like, nah, it's not for me really. So that would be interesting. And I have nothing to represent this one with other than this picture here, because I don't own anything by Dolly Parton or Kenny Rogers. I never bought a single back in the days, but I did have it on some of my mixtapes, so that's why it's on this list, because it's grabbed me in a way. We now reach the #5 spot on this chart from January 1984, and it's from a band that had quite a history in the music industry, but I was oblivious to the fact. To me, they were a fairly new band from England. I'm talking about Slade and My Oh My. I believe in woman, my oh my. Yeah, yet another one that just went over my head, because at this point I probably heard their Christmas single several times, but I failed to connect the dots completely. To me, this was something new. I never heard of Slade before. Here it is, My Oh My. And I'm not very well versed when it comes to Slade and the previous output, but I have heard some of it. And just comparing it to this, something happened at this point, and I'm not really sure if they just changed producers, used different recording techniques, or just said, we just need to keep up with the times. But they made the right decision, whatever it was, because it's more polished sound on this one compared to the previous outputs. And it starts out like a traditional ballad. It's a very classical formula to this one, but then it just builds and builds and builds some more, up until the point where we all chant along My Oh My with Noddy Holder and the gang. And I dare anyone who listened to this one not to sing along, because it's one of those, I would dare to call it Slade's anthem, really, where we all sing together. Now, a brilliant single. And I just have to say, what a brilliant cover on this one. Still love it. A lot of people probably say today, oh yeah, it's very 80s. And yes, indeed it is, because it was released in 1983. And it came from an album they also released in 1983, which was called The Amazing Kamikaze Syndrome, if I'm not mistaken. And it would produce yet another hit for Slade further down the line in 1984, but that's something for a future episode. But yeah, what a great single. And I was always fascinated by another thing here, and it's a B-side, if you can see here. Keep Your Hands Off My Power Supply. What a wonderful title. I always found that really funny. And it turns out, when it was released in America, they changed the title from The Amazing Kamikaze Syndrome to Keep Your Hands Off My Power Supply. Don't know if the other title was offensive in some way, but they choose to go with that one. Just a fact, really. Yeah, but if you haven't listened to this one, go and put it on straight away and sing along with the whole family. My, oh my. Oh yeah, and by the way, it spent 10 weeks in the Swedish charts and in the peak position of number 1. Great one. Next on the list is number 10, which is Men Without Hats and Safety Dance. This is a bit of a perplexing one to me, because I know for a fact it was released in 1982, but it didn't reach our charts in Sweden until late 1983. And here we are in January of 1984, and it's still on the charts here. It spent 8 weeks on the chart, peaked at number 3, but I'm not going to dwell into this mystery any further. I'm just glad that we got it. What a great track from this Canadian band. And the Safety Dance in itself, I read when doing some research for this episode that Ivan, the singer, said in one interview that it was more of a protest song against the style of dancing in the new wave clubs, because back in the day, and when he say back in the day, I assume it was like the punk days where you went to listen to a band and you were pogoing, so your whole body is a bit stiff and you jump up and down like a stick and bump into people and things like that. That's basically pogoing. And you were not allowed to do that in the new wave clubs, because you were told by the bouncers, if you keep doing that, we'll throw you out, and that's probably what happened. So it's a protest song against that safety dance that was practiced in the new wave clubs. That at least is my interpretation of it. And there's been a lot of other rumors around this song that it was protest songs against nuclear arsenals around the world and all that, but he debunked it in different interviews. It's all about protesting the safety dance in the clubs. But that aside, once again, what a great song, and I would challenge anyone not to dance when hearing this one, even today. It's such a driven and upbeat song. Yeah, no, I can't resist it. I just have to dance right away. We can dance, we can dance. The next one is in the number 11 spot, and it's a legend in my eyes. We're talking about Howard Jones and New Song. Howard Jones, one of my first big idols when it comes to the music world. I was mesmerized with this song, New Song. To that extent that in school we had each week, I think, about an hour or so of carpentry class where we were taught about how to do things with wood, carve woods and things like that. So I spent most of 1984 carving into a big slab of wood Howard Jones, the name Howard Jones. I carved it, I painted it, and eventually I hung it on my wall back home. I was obsessed with Howard Jones. And it all started with this one. This is original 12-inch, the maxi single. And what a great one. I highly recommend, if you do like New Song, to pick this one up. It's a really nice extended version. And you also get Change the Man as the second track. And the third one, Conditioning, which soon became one of my favorites as well. And just around the corner was his debut album coming out, Humans Live, where both New Song and Conditioning were to be featured. Yeah, what a great track. It entered in December of 1983 on the Swedish charts, only stayed for 4 weeks, peaked at number 10. what a miserable result. I don't know, because we had synth-driven sounds for a couple of years now, so people were quite familiar with that synthetic sound, the synthesizer sound. And this was a really upbeat, catchy tune. I can't understand what they were thinking. But there was more success to come when it comes to Howard Jones. You just wait. Just a bit further down the line in 1984. We will see more of Howard Jones, I promise you. And in number 12 on this Swedish chart from January 1984, we find another artist that we thought, or at least me, thought was fairly new to the music industry. And boy was I wrong. This is Lionel Richie and All Night Long. All night long, all night. This is surely the party track, right? You crank it on, people are dancing all over the place, even on the ceiling. Right? Yeah, that's what we thought, at least back then. We loved this track, and when I say we, me and a very good friend of mine, we really fell for this track. And I remember he was buying the album where this one was included. It was called Dancing on the Ceiling or something like that. It was released, was it late 83 or later on in 84? Anyhow, when he got that album, we were so invested in that whole album as well. Not only All Night Long, but especially All Night Long. We loved that one. And I could just say, listening back to it today, it lost a lot of its charm and the magic I thought it had back then. I'm not that certain that it's the party track, right? Still okay, but no. I just wanted to include it here because I was so invested in this track when it came out. And as you can see, I don't have any record by Lionel Richie to this day, so it has to be represented once more with this picture here. And it did spend 6 weeks in the Swedish charts and peaked at number 8, so that's it. Next we have in position number 13, something that I'm really, really excited about, and I think this was my introduction to Italo Disco. I'm of course talking about Ryan Paris and Dolce Vita. Nobody else than you. One of the great pop tracks of the whole of the 1980s, I would think. It's instantaneously recognizable when you put it on. You can't help to stomp your feet to it and sing along. This is, like I said, brilliant, brilliant pop songs. I love how they got all those synth lines going on all over the place in the spectrum for this song. You got those quirky, out of pitch synths in some places. And that beautiful melody and the voice of Ryan Paris, it just all melts together to perfection. This is one of the really outstanding tracks of 1983. And I remember when it was released, I think it was late 83, perhaps October, November. It soon shot up in the charts in Sweden, and it was played on school discos. We recorded it on cassette from radio, of course, and played it over and over again. It was just a staple every time we met up at someone's place and we were playing music, or like I said, at school discos. Such a great, great tune. And I actually had the 7-inch at one point, but it's lost in time, and I now upgraded to this one actually last year. This is a reissue from 6 Records, and you will get the extended version on this one, the instrumental version, and then 3 new mixes of this one. Just a beautiful packaging of this one from 6 Records. Great mixes. And I just have to show you because they reissued this one on colored vinyl. And if you watch my channel, you know how much I love colored vinyl. This comes on a light blue marble vinyl, as you hopefully can see. Really, really nice. But most importantly, it contains one of the best pop songs from the 80s, Dolce Vita with Ryan Paris. And I'm pleased to say it stayed for 8 weeks in the Swedish charts, and it peaked at number 2. It was a big, big hit, and it found a place in my heart forever. Ryan Paris, Dolce Vita. And in number 15 on this list from January 1984, we can find an artist that I didn't know much about, but at least I knew that she had been in show business or the music industry for quite a while. But my father sure did know who that was when I was listening to it, because he said, "Oh, I remember her." This is Eartha Kitt.
You know, I've tried some other men, the kind with zeros less than 10. But every time I grab the ring, it's always brass.
Eartha Kitt, she's been around for ages, it seems, at this point. I think she started her career back in the 1950s, really. And she was back now in 1983 when this one was released. And it was just perfect. And even if my father said, "Oh, I know Eartha Kitt, she's quite good," usually it sets off a tingle in the back of my head. It was like, oh, well, if our parents listen to it and I think it's good, it's probably not very cool. It's just the way we were as teenagers. But in this case, I had to make an exception, because this was really, really good. It had a hint of disco and had that polished 80s sound to it, and that deep, unique voice of Eartha Kitt. It was just perfect. And still to this day, I love this track. It's really good, and a lot of the things that she's singing about that I didn't really pick up at that age, I picked up today. It's really funny lyrics in this one. I love this track. Sadly, don't have it in my collection, so I can't show you, so we'll go with the picture here. But I will surely pick this one up as soon as I can come across it in any secondhand store, for sure. Love this track. Just had to include this one. Eartha Kitt and Where's My Man? And in the number 16 spot on this chart from January 1984, we'll find the silky, smooth voice of Paul Young. I'm talking about Come Back and Stay.
If you want to stay mine, just love me forever.
And this is one of those artists that I was already acquainted with. And if you listen to one of my earlier episodes, I was talking about a very good friend of mine in Sweden who had an older sister who used to work or go over to London quite frequently, and she would bring back records that we never heard of before. And Paul Young was one of them with his debut album, No Parley. We just fell in love with this album, and it's got such great tracks. Not only Come Back and Stay, Wherever I Lay My Hat was one of them, Love of the Common People. And one track particular that I fell in love with was Love Will Tear Us Apart. And yes, it would take me more than 2 years before I actually heard the original. I was oblivious to the fact that this was a cover in the first place, but it's actually a Joy Division song, of course. And it was quite a shock to me when I heard the original for the first time. It's a wonderful song to begin with, so don't get me wrong, but it took some time for me to get used to it, but I do love the original as well. But they are completely different entities. You got the soulful voice of Paul Young over here, and that really emotional voice of Ian Curtis over here. So they're quite different, but I do love them both because it's such a great song to begin with. And for some reason, I don't have any Paul Young in my record collection. I know, shame. At least I should have the No Parley album, and when preparing for this episode I was certain that I had No Parley in my record collection, but turned out I didn't. So I have to pick it up at some point because I think it's still a really great album, and certainly Come Back and Stay as a single is top notch. And now to the last point of interest on this Swedish chart from January 1984. It's from a Swedish artist. It's in the 18th place on this chart. He's called Magnus Uggla. And I think I mentioned him here before at some point. But he had a really successful album in late 83. It was called Välkommen till Folkhemmet, and this is one. And I think this was his fourth album or something like that. But this was actually the point where he rose to real fame in Sweden, where people were starting to notice him. And especially with the single in its 18th place here, called EQ, or IQ in English. And lo and behold, I've been walking around for 40 years thinking EQ was an original composition by Magnus Uggla, but it turns out it's a cover. Who knew? Well, certainly not me, but if I read the sleeve notes on this one, I would probably be aware, but I haven't done that for 40 years. Wow. Well, it turns out it's an original composition by Bruce Woolley. It's called Blue Blue Victoria. I was blown away by this fact. And Bruce Woolley, for you who don't know, was part of Buggles, who did a video Kill the Radio Star with Trevor Horn. And he also co-produced other artists with Trevor Horn, Bruce Woolley did, and arranged things for them. And one of them was Handheld in Black and White, which I happen to have here in beautiful white vinyl. And you got Dollar there, because it was Dollar who did Handheld in Black and White. And there on the bottom, you can see it's arranged by Bruce Woolley. Yeah, who knew that one of the biggest Swedish songs of 1983 and 84 was actually a cover? Well, like I said, certainly not me. I was blown away by this fact. But anyhow, the lyrics for the Magnus Uggla version, EQ, is not anywhere near the original ones. They are completely different lyrics to it. He only took the melody of it, which is a brilliant, brilliant melody. The one Magnus Uggla did, the lyrics for that one, is about big, strong guys and, basically making fun of chauvinists, basically, and how big and strong they think they are. And this single by Magnus Uggla, which is a cover of a Bruce Woolley song, spent 9 weeks in the Swedish charts and peaked at number 2. You would think it would go to number 1 because it was hugely popular, but something held it off for the first place in 83. Now it was down to the 18th place in this January of 1984. And that really concludes my list for this episode. And I'm going to continue doing this for each and every month for this year, looking back to 1984. And you might say, why don't we do that for 1994? Who knows? There could be something going on in the background when it comes to that one. And 2004, who knows? But we're going to focus on the 80s because that is, to me, the most exciting times in musical production. So, yeah. But that's what we're going to do. And in February, at the end of February, when that episode about the Swedish charts come out, I'm also going to bring in some of the UK charts from the same time in February of 1984, just to make some comparison, because there were some entries on the UK charts that didn't pop up on the Swedish charts, and vice versa, of course. And it could be interesting to see why that was and what it was, of course. And the reason I didn't do it for this episode is because we had so much spilling over from 1983, so I had so much to talk about on the Swedish charts, so I didn't want to make it too lengthy. And I know it's still lengthy. Sorry about that. But that's it. And throughout the year, I'm going to do some other specials around specific albums from 1984 or singles from that point. But I'm also going to intermix that with some new releases from this year and from 2023. So it's going to be a mixture of both new and old. But that's it for me for this time. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really grateful for each and every one of you who's watching my videos. And if you really like it, give them the thumbs up. And please start commenting as well. What was some of your favorites from 1984? And what are you looking forward to me talking about when it comes to 1984 releases and all of that? Until next time, take care of yourself and... Adjö!